think.
Okay, not a problem. Go ahead. Everything's recording. You're fine.
Okay, great. So I just want to say two words that we are welcoming today Cheryl Gordon. She is a Jewish educator, and she is presenting a monthly cycle of talks within NCJW. And I enjoy very much her presentations. It's called Something Newish About Being Jewish. So, you can see it on NCJW website, and I don't want to delay it any longer. Cheryl, it's yours.
Okay, well, thank you. I had asked how much time, or Etty had asked me how much time, and I had said a fat hour, and I'm hoping that you will still grant that to me. But I certainly understand if you guys need to leave for whatever reasons you may need to leave. I am sharing with you a speech that I've given quite a few times, which are the family secrets, stories of crypto Jews, particularly focusing on the southwestern part of the United States. There's a disclaimer. I've got some letters after my names, but none of them are in history. I'm not a historian. I'm not a scholar on this particular topic, although by circumstance I've learned quite a bit over the years. I actually have come to speak about this because it's personal to me. Because I know these folks, I have known these folks. What Etty didn't tell you is that I moved here about 5 years ago from El Paso, Texas. I had many different responsibilities in El Paso, but in the later years, I was the director of the Jewish Federation. I also am a fluent Spanish speaker. So the fact that I was visible, that I was identified with the Jewish community, people knew where I was every day, and the fact that I spoke Spanish meant that not infrequently I would get a knock at the door or phone call, can I come talk to you? And these are basically folks who I didn't know before and came and wanted to talk about something that had been in the back of their heads, maybe for just a few years, maybe for a very, very long time. I've come to know and love and connect with many of these folks, and I'm going to share with you some of their stories and also hopefully broaden your world and help you understand that there are so many people who connect with our people who don't necessarily have our background or look like us or even speak the same language. So I'd like to start with suggesting to you that maybe we rewind if you went to school in the United States. I'm going to say, I don't know, fourth grade, fifth grade. You learned about in 1492.
Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
You got it, right. But you didn't get the second part of that, probably, chances are, which is also the King and Queen of Spain told all the Jews they had to leave. You didn't get that part. That part is what we're going to focus on and also talk about where they are today, what had happened after that edict came out. Speaking of edicts, I just happen to have a very, very abbreviated taste of what that edict sounded like. So let me share it with you. This is in the palace, and some of you may have been there, called the Alhambra in Granada in Spain. And this is a part of it, obviously translated into English. We command all Jews and Jewesses of whatever age they may be, who reside and dwell in our said kingdoms and dominions, both natives and non-natives, who in any manner or for any cause may have come to dwell therein, that by the end of the month of July next of present year, they depart from all our said kingdoms and dominions with their sons, daughters, manservants, maidservants, and Jewish attendants, both great and small, of whatever age they may be. They shall not presume to return nor reside in them nor in any part of them, either as residents, travelers, or in any manner whatsoever. If they should, they will incur the penalty of death and confiscation of all of their property for our treasury, which penalty they incur of all of their property for our treasury in the act itself without further trial, declaration, or sentence. So who are these folks? Well, it may surprise you to know, and some of you may have learned this, that the Jewish presence in Spain even predates the Roman times. But in the early 8th century, the Muslims conquered Christian Spain. And at that time, and for the next 500 years, Muslim and Jews were tight. It was known as the golden age of high culture in Spain, and Spain was a world leader. Jews were very much a part of that leadership. There were great rabbis and financiers and statesmen and scientists and professors and artists and poets, politicians and scholars. And one estimate says that in the 13th century, 80% of world Jewry lived in Iberia, meaning what is today Spain or Portugal. 80% of world Jewry. So those of us who are so sure that we're Ashkenazi, I ask you to think again. Because as you'll hear in a few moments, when they left, they went all over the place. And chances are that some of you may have roots that you had no clue from, or wouldn't have any reason, to be impossible to trace, that maybe you had some ancestors who actually were in this exodus. So at the start of the 12th century, meaning the 1100s, the reconquest by the church came into being, and it was gaining huge momentum, and things weren't pretty for the Jews. They were increasingly subjugated by the Christian kings, and they were given 3 great choices. You get to convert, you get to leave, or you get to die. Convert, leave, or die. So within 150 years, all of Spain and Portugal was Christian, except for the province of Granada. Expulsion, in fact, was in the year 1492, but the killings were in full force for more than 100 years before that. And many Jews were baptized to save their lives. And when they were baptized, they took different names. So 2 of the people who are my most unfavorite on my list of unfavorite people in the world, and forgive my language, but I've been calling them this forever, is this Queen Isabella the bitch and King Ferdinand the wimp. And they had along in their team a guy who was known as Torquemada the Inquisitioner, who was the confessor and possibly have something going on the side with Queen Isabella, I've read. And he basically encouraged them to throw out all of the Jews. Ostensibly, this was to make Spain Judenrein, to make it pure, to make it a Christian country. But the truth is, like in so many things in history, and we can talk about it if we have time, there was a financial motivation for doing this as well. So when this happened in 1492, and the date that it happened was the last day that they could be, was on the secular calendar, July 31st, 1492. And the first day that the country was supposed to be free of Jews was the 1st of August, which happens to be, was Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, a day of mourning for us for many tragedies on our calendar for our people. Coincidence? I don't know. But at any rate, in that particular time, at that time, about 50,000 people, about 50,000 people converted additionally at that time. And there were been about 200,000 that had converted prior over the 200 years or so before that. And about 200,000 people left. 200,000 people left. That's a lot of people. I don't know if any of you have come across ever the name Don Isaac Abrabanel. It's a well-known name. He, among other things, was a rabbi. But the thing that you may not know is that he was a Spanish citizen at the time of the expulsion, and also the Minister of Finance for Ferdinand and Isabella. And they approached him and said, and this is, I should say parenthetically, after his unsuccessful attempt to talk them out of expelling the Jews, they said to him, you can stay. You and your family can stay. We need you here. He was apparently a very good Minister of Finance. And they even sweetened the pot. You know what they did? And this is absolutely documented. They said, we know in your religion you need to have 10 people to pray. So you can choose 9 other families to stay with you. His answer was no, I'm going with my people. But a little side note. So where did they go? They went anywhere they could. The bulk of them went to the Ottoman Empire because that was welcoming for them. They were looking, the doors were open for people who were leaving. The Balkans, Holland, the Netherlands, what we call the Netherlands, Holland, same thing. England, in fact, all over Europe and North Africa as well. It's a lot of people, 200,000 people. They went many different places. Now, please be clear, these are the ones who chose to remain Jewish, to not convert, either with a sincere conversion or a false conversion for appearances. These are the ones who retain their Jewish identity. I need to share with you a little bit of a vocabulary lesson so that we can use some terms, or so I can use them comfortably and nobody is in doubt. The first one is Sephardim. Sepharad is the Hebrew word for Spain. And Sephardim are the Spanish, or Spanish Jews it's come to be. In today's world, Sephardim lumps in other groups, basically non-Ashkenazic. The truth is, if we were going to be accurate, there are more than Ashkenazim and Sephardim in Judaism. But for our purposes today, we're going to talk about people coming out of the Spanish, Spain part of the Sephardic identification. Terms that are used in this a lot when we have this discussion are terms like conversos, converts, anusim. This is the word in Hebrew for forced, and people who are descendants of people who were forced are called bnei anusim, children of the forced. And another word is new Christians. New Christians had a special status, and it wasn't a positive special status within the Spanish society. A new Christian was someone who converted and was under constant suspicion. As a matter of fact, the laws were that you had to have 3 generations of being a Christian so that your blood was clean. Those of you who may speak Spanish, limpieza de la sangre. Your blood was purified. After 3 generations, then you were no longer coming from new Christians. But while you were a new Christian, you were suspect to a lot of things. It was a label, meaning that being converted wasn't enough. You were still being judged constantly and still with potential problems. The word Inquisition, we think about sometimes as chasing after Jews. Well, Inquisition is an office of the church, or was an office of the church, and their power was only among about their church members, in other words, Christians and new Christians. So what they were doing in terms of ferreting out in the Inquisition were people who were Judaizing. That was the crime. They had no power over someone who was a defined Jew, perhaps living in Holland, even though it might be a Catholic country, but someone who said that they were Christian and were still Judaizing. Those are the people they were out to get. There were lots of horrific things. This isn't a class on the Inquisition. Maybe you'll get a little taste of it in a little bit. But that particular term is sometimes used against Jews, and the truth is it's really meant to be used against, focusing on new Christians. I have to throw in the word Ladino, which is also called Judeo-Espanol. There's a little bit of difference. It's based essentially on medieval Spanish. For people who speak Spanish, it's quite intelligible. Sometimes the spelling is a little weird, sometimes the pronunciation is a little weird, and they're definite borrowings from Hebrew. The other term that I just want to mention, because you may hear it in a video or so, is that people who are 500 years post the expulsion and want to reclaim their Judaism frequently do go through a formal conversion, and there are reasons for doing this, but the term of art that they are comfortable with is that they are returning, and they will talk about their return. So I share that particular vocabulary word with you. One more word on the Inquisition before we move on. and that is that the Inquisition was in place until, well, from about I think the year began was the 1535, something like that, formally. There are some notes of Inquisition-like things going on in many different places hundreds of years before, but in terms of the full force for the Spanish population. And it was in place in Spain until somewhere in the late 1800s, believe it or not, although no longer in force. So the term was around for a very long time. So what interests us today is really another phenomenon, that many of these folks sought a new and freer life in the New World, and that's going to be our focus. So Columbus had, you remember, from sailing the ocean blue in 1492, 3 ships, and there were probably, most likely, folks who saw this an opportunity to get out of Spain and to seek a new life, possibly returning to their Judaism. Nominally, they were absolutely Christian or new Christians. We do know that one of his team was a gentleman whose Christianized name was Luis de Torres. And Luis de Torres was chosen because he spoke 4 or 5 languages. It happened that none of the languages he spoke, whether they be Hebrew or Greek or Portuguese or Latin or Spanish, were very helpful in the exploration of the New World. But by the same token, he got the job. We do know that he was a new Christian, so at least one was on those ships with Columbus. So I mentioned that the Inquisition came to Mexico in 1524. So they already had reason to believe that people who had arrived with the initial conquerors, the initial explorers, were going to be Judaizing and were not sincere converts. And there became to be very heavy pressure on people. And essentially at the end of the 1500s and the first half of the 1600s, there were very, very powerful offices of the Inquisition in Mexico. We're talking about 150 years after the first landings of Columbus and the others after him. About 150 years after that, we're focusing on Mexico now because Mexico was part of the Southwest that I'm going to share with you, and it was definitely a center of settlement and a center for new Christians and Judaizing Christians and people wanting to return to Judaism. But at that time, let's just take a year that has a number. The year 1650 was estimated that there were already 20,000 Europeans living in what is today Mexico. 20,000. And about, or at least 10% were secret Jews. They wished to return to Judaism. There's another term that I think might be helpful also now. I talked about B'nai Anusim, the children of the forest, and I talked about new Christians, but we also can talk about the term that has come to be the term that is used a lot now, sort of as the translation into English from the B'nai Anusim of Hebrew, which I remember I said were children of the forest, and that is crypto-Jews, meaning people who were Jewish but were hiding their Judaism. So it is believed now, and there's an amazing amount of documentation, that in the year 1650, there were at least 2,000 people, crypto-Jews, not sincere converts, but people who were Judaizing, living in Mexico. There's a lot to talk about and not a whole lot of time. And my voice might be a little bit draining on you, so I'm going to mix it up a bit shortly. But I just wanted to share with you a couple sort of facts, because at the end of the day, it's kind of come full circle, and I relate to them personally. There was a man, his name was Carvajal, Luis de Carvajal, and I just happen to have, so you can see how it's spelled. Okay, we got Carva, and you know that in Spanish you laugh, ha, 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 right? J-A-J-A-J-A, and Chanukah is spelled with a J, and Chai is spelled with a J, so it's Carvajal, cha, cha, okay? So there was a gentleman whose name was Luis de Carvajal, and he was a sincere Christian convert. He was a new Christian of Jewish descent, and he went to the king, who at that time was King Philip. We're talking about the late 1500s now. And he says, I want to colonize Tampico, not northern Mexico, central southern. And I have the folks that I know will come with me to do it. Just don't ask me who I'm bringing along. And somehow he must have had a very charming personality, because the king agreed, even though this was contrary to the laws, which were you couldn't have anybody on the ship with you who hadn't had his blood purified. In other words, was not at least 3 generations of being a Christian in his family. So the king did agree. And Luis de Carvajal brought over 200 folks. Almost all of them were converts, conversos, new Christians. That was a lot of problems for him. He, it is written, was a sincere convert, but he didn't really check his family. He assumed that they were. One of the things that didn't think was be problematic was that his sister was actually married to someone who was a practicing rabbi. He came to the New World. There were many, many stories, but he also had a nephew who's the same name, Luis, as well, who really blew it by trying to reconvert a lot of the conversos and wasn't very subtle about it. And he was caught by the inquisitors. And first time he was let go, and they had this great fashion item, which is called a San Benito, which is a pointed hat and a yellow, horrible smock, I guess you call it, he was made to walk around with and such. And that wasn't enough. And he was very, very committed in his ways, which actually is a beautiful thing. I'm sorry, I'm coming across smug, and there's great respect in it. And I've read his story, and what he went through is unbelievable. Having said that, the second time around, there was no patience from the inquisitors, and he ended up being burned at the stake for the crime of Judaizing. But it wasn't only he who was practicing his Judaism, he was encouraging others to convert. One of the things that I remember reading that impressed me, that I just learned from, and some of you may find this interesting, is that among these folks, when they found anybody who read Bible, they would cleave to whoever that community would be. So that's why in my world, I know a good number of people, even though stereotypically we might think that Mexicans are Catholics all the time, there's a very strong Protestant hold there. And I guess there was early on too, as time went on. And Bible readers because Jews didn't know much about Judaism at all, but they did know that Jews read the Bible. So if there were people who read Bibles, they would hang with them. Another thing that in terms of Jews and linking their histories to other folks that I just want to share with you is one of the things that happened was name changes, very sincere, but not really name changes. Even today, if you come across anybody who has what I would call a hyper-Christianized name, a very, very religious name, a name like De la Cruz, which means of the cross, or Jesus as a first name, or Saint, Santa something. Very often, these were names that were used to sort of put another layer of Christian flavor into someone's life, another layer of disguise. So that's just a little thing. We hear often people say to me, isn't it true that Jews use ES at the end of their name, like Dominguez or Sanchez? That is actually a myth. ES was more Portuguese, EZ was more Spanish. I had failed to mention that the inquisitors had a guidebook. And they had a guidebook that told inquisitors what to look for if people were secretly Judaizing. One of the things you did is you looked to see if there was any kind of smoke coming out of a chimney on a Saturday. If there was never any smoke coming out of the chimney, they might be Judaizing. They didn't light a fire on Shabbat. If they happened to be walking around looking up at the sky on Saturday night at dark time, when it was dark, maybe they were looking for 3 stars to see if Shabbat was over. That would be a crime of Judaizing. If they had 2 pots of stew on the fire all the time, and one they ate from and the other they served to their servants, they might be Judaizing. Why am I mentioning this now? I'm not trying to teach you how to be inquisitors. But when new Christians got a hold of any of these pages from these documents, they kind of use that as a guide of Jewish practice. Oh, this is what we're supposed to do. It's kind of weird, kind of amazing to me that it would be the church and the inquisitors that were providing some basic Jewish information, although not always very factual, to these people who were hiding out. I'm gonna go forward a little bit. Let me see if there's something I want to mention before I want to show you something. Forgive me. I'm focusing on Mexico. The Inquisition was strong in Mexico, but not as strong as it was in Peru, not as strong as it was in Cartagena, Colombia. Monterrey, Mexico was a center for Inquisition, and the records are there still today. Lima, Peru was a center. Cartagena, Cartagena in Spanish, in Colombia. And I share that with you in terms of just sort of basic knowledge, where there are archives and a lot of folks have found history that they've been able to relate to with their distant ancestors. Okay. As time went on, these communities, the secret Jewish communities, clearly became more and more dilute. And then after a while, it was just family legends. I'd like to screen share now. Let's see how this goes.
People in New Mexico have lengthy genealogies that could trace their family literally back to Spain, back to the family relative that was tried by the Inquisition. Some of these family genealogies can be 300 pages long.
Okay, we're going to go back a little bit.
Been here for many, many, many generations. I grew up on a ranch, and ever since I was real little, they had me on a horse, and it was just me and my dad out there working cattle.
Come on. Hey, come on.
That's who I am. Where the journey started as far as going back and finding out, okay, well, who are we? Where did this come from? These are family secrets that were never meant to be told to anybody. And it's still something that's hidden. The isolation from my relatives, that felt lonely.
My family didn't like the idea that I was Jewish. They felt kind of like betrayed that I converted.
As a child, I was very skeptical. There was a point and I said, okay, this is what I am. I'm Jewish.
I remember asking my dad when I was a young kid, what are we? Are we Spanish American? Are we Mexican American? Are we Chicano? My dad said, we are who we are. And we're la raza cósmica, the cosmic race.
So when we would ask him things about our family's history, my grandfather would say to us, if I were you, I would be very careful who you told these things to, because it's not popular, and in some cases it's not very safe to reveal a Jewish heritage.
There has been this phenomenon in New Mexico. With the people coming back to reclaim Judaism, it makes them feel uncomfortable because they would like to be accepted by the established Jewish community. Not being accepted creates a barrier.
There are some people who feel great pain because
It's a
they feel they're being
program
disloyal to their
talking about the
ancestors.
crypto Jews in
And
the
some people
Southwest,
have
mostly
to
Mexico.
hide the fact that
And
their
also from
ancestors
Christina
were
speaking
revolutionary
from
in
El
terms of
Paso,
their
where
belief
she was
system.
worked for
And
the
it is
Jewish
painful for
Federation.
Somebody
many
just
people.
mute.
And a lot of these people with this
There
background
have been
came
people
to
who
speak
have
to
said
her.
there's no such thing as crypto Jews. It's a myth. These customs they do, they're not really Jewish customs. This is true. I mean, this is really a true thing that's happening.
Okay, folks, I'm going to share with you some personal stories and some other things, and we're going to meet some of these folks a little bit more closely. But I just like to take a moment or so and give you the opportunity to share whatever you'd like to share or ask whatever you'd like to ask.
What I said we were going to have for dinner tomorrow night.
You didn't.
Okay, I think that I'm. I think maybe is there someone who can mute, or can we mute everyone but me? Would that be possible?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I was muted also. I'm unmuted now. I can hear you. Does someone want to talk? No?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
A book is called The Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean that
Right.
talks a lot about this subject. And I find it very interesting how we've been educated in the United States with a viewpoint of Ashkenazi Jews, but this history of the Sephardim is so fascinating. And I have so many questions and wonder so much about it. A lot of the implications from some of the books and the Jews in Holland and how this played out is that people think there's a school of thought that Columbus himself was Jewish. Do you have any evidence along those lines?
That question comes up all the time, and thank you for asking it. I think others are probably thinking that as well. I again have a disclaimer that I am not a historian. I can tell you that I have absolutely attended courses. Thomas did some investigations in Spain. I think the majority of experts today would say that people wish that he were a Jew of Jewish heritage, but there is absolutely no concrete evidence of such. What we do know, and this is probably not a satisfying answer, is that he was heavily supported and funded by Jews, particularly in Italy.
Right.
But there is every obscure kind of hint people have investigated, even to the point where in traditional Jews, and you don't see it so much today, there is a thing to write Baruch Hashem Bet Hey at the top of a letter before you wrote it. Apparently, they found some letters that had a unintelligible squiggle that he had written, so they decided, oh, he's Jewish. But that is kind of a big stretch.
We wish that.
Right, exactly. There's no concrete evidence, and people continue searching, and people often, point with pride and wish it to be, but we can't document that in any way. And a lot of people have invested a lot of effort in trying to clarify that.
Why do you think we're not educated about this? It's very interesting history that seems to have come about in the last 20 or 30 years.
I think your timing is absolutely right. I mean, I think from my perspective, the reason it's come, I have to tell you that I have a sister-in-law who's now married to my brother, coincidentally. That's why she's my sister-in-law, who they've been married, Joseph is 20, I'm going to say 28 years now, maybe. And she knew that she was from that heritage. Her father was a Pentecostal minister in Puerto Rico. And he had this wonderful custom of once a year, I think it was on Easter, beating his 3 daughters to beat the Jew out of them. It was, and they always knew that they had this flaw because they were somewhere along the line from Spain Jewish. But she was the only one I knew, and she did convert quite a few years before she met my brother, uh, because she felt that she wanted to be Jewish. But she never saw herself. She saw herself as an individual. She wasn't part of a movement. The movement, the idea of this particular group of people identifying as such and making their stories known and finding uh, others in the same situation with the same passions, really is, as you said, about 20 years now. There have always been individuals, but this is really about 20 years. The why is all, until we're in the forefront of something, until we have a reason to, there's so many things to distract us and so many things to learn. And Jewish history is so rich with things to learn that unless it's on your plate, you're not going to see it. The other part that we have to give credit to is the internet. It's much easier now to research. It's the information is more available. And when one person becomes empowered, they empower another. There are now 2 films out on this. One is called The Children of the Inquisition. It came out about 3 years ago. I showed you the little bit of this one called The Long Journey, which just came out in November. There's increasing books and things like that. But, why? I'm sure there's so many things in history that, we can't.
Thank you for a very good discussion.
I hope that you'll stay tuned for a little bit more, but thank you for a very good question. Okay, anything? So let me share a little bit, and you feel free to, and I'm going to take this personal, just because I want you to know what we're talking about. And the way this was titled was Crypto Jews of the Southwest, and where are they now, and what became of them. And as I say, by fate and circumstance and mazel and good luck, I've come to know quite a few. In addition to my sister-in-law, who, by the way, her name was Ruth. Her name is still Ruth, and her sister's name is Rachel. Good old Pentecostal names in Puerto Rico. So you can realize that even 500 years later, there's something in your, in people's minds about the Jewish identity. So I'm thinking back to having an ice cream cone with this guy named John Garcia, and I'm going to say it was 2005-ish, probably, in El Paso, Texas, and because he wanted to talk to me because of a lot of reasons. One of the reasons, and no offense, Rabbi Klein, a lot of these folks who are thinking about returning are afraid to go to a rabbi. They don't want to go there first. They don't want their, and some of this is very much about their experience with priests prior, and they just expect the same kind of reception, etc., whatever. So I was kind of an easy target, just being a Jewish professional in the community. At any rate, he shared that he always 7 brothers. One brother had converted to Judaism for marriage, and 2 others really wanted to convert to Judaism for many, many years. A lot of people say they had a tug in their hearts. They didn't know what it was. They didn't fit in the religion. Brilliant man, an attorney. He went to Monterrey, Mexico, one of the Inquisition centers. He's a balanced, strong, articulate bilingual. And he read the Inquisition records and found his, I don't know how many back greats, grandmothers, Inquisition records where her arms were twisted off or twisted around or whatever until she confessed to Judaizing. And he was sharing with me that he found his home in Judaism, and he was in the process of conversion. And later he became he still is a very active member of the Jewish community. But he was sharing with me that one of the things is he had such incredible hate for the church that he didn't think he could have love for a synagogue. It was just another church. So we, as best as I could, worked it through, obviously introduced him to several rabbis and found his path. But I remember that ice cream cone because I had never met somebody with that kind of a story and that kind of a passion. And this wasn't just a quote unquote a feeling. This was a 30-year journey with research and his dealing with his own, I don't know what you would call it, his own nemesis, his own devils in his head about the things, his attitudes and such. But at the end of the day, his mom didn't want him to do it, even though he was 50 years old at that time. His mother was truly upset that this was going to happen. They had the history, they had the documentation. They usually say, we always knew we were Jews. I mean, a lot of the conversations start that way. So anyway, I remembered, I think we just wanted to share with them. I have so many, and we don't have time. But Miriam her name was Miriam. I had no inkling that there was anything Jewish in her background, except that she loved Judaism. Very intelligent woman, beautiful, serious, passionate woman who doesn't. She owns a trucking company, which kind of doesn't sync with the way she presents herself, but that's another story. And anyway, she actually converted in Israel, Orthodox. Met somebody back in El Paso, Jewish Ashkenazi, son of a Holocaust survivor, and married him. And she got noticed like 15 years later that an aunt in, I think, Parral, Chihuahua, which is one of the northern states, Parral is a pretty decent sized city, had died, and so she should go there. Anyway, to make a long story short, at the table after the funeral, there was a tablecloth that had all sorts of Hebrew embroidery on it, and candlesticks and chalot embroidered on it. She had no, and she still doesn't know. The woman had died, but how this woman would come across that particular thing. And then what else? Lo and behold, the mirrors are covered. She had never had in her family an inkling that she was Jewish. That she was of Jewish heritage. She was already a Jew for quite a few years when she learned this particular thing. But that particular trope, I've heard more than once, that people convert for independent reasons, thinking they have no connection, and then something pops up that realizes that they in fact do have that in their heritage. If any of you, and I doubt that you would, but I've studied quite a bit about Latin American literature, Latin American history, and such. And one of the what's the word I want? Progressive, positive forces in Mexico was coming out of the revolution was a very idealistic president whose name was Francisco Madero. Francisco Madero. I knew the name from books. He was revered, and he did a lot for bringing Mexico into modern age. We're talking about like 1920s. Knocked on the door again at the Federation. Hi, my name, and this guy really didn't speak very good English, so we spoke in Spanish. Hi, my name is, and it's no secret, my name is Rodolfo Madero, and he was about early 30s, and we're Jewish, but I want to become officially Jewish. And he comes from this political family, highly moneyed, very socially visible family, an historic, almost revered family in Mexico. And they always knew they were Jewish, but he was the first one who wanted to return. So he and his family have been absolutely amazing in terms of being positive forces in not only the El Paso Jewish community, but his son became a National Youth Group officer and such. And I just share that because he was, this name of this person who, we wouldn't know was Jewish, comes out of the woodwork. Yes.
Dan Aronson.
Yeah.
Somebody ask a question? No?
Sorry.
Okay. Another person I wanted to mention to you there are a lot, but somebody who has actually become a speaker on the circuit now. Her name is Sonia Loya, and she tells a story essentially that her father, she felt Jewish, she wanted to convert, she got a lot of sort of neutral, no reaction whatsoever. She did convert, she didn't know she was returning until later. And basically many years afterwards, her father said, we knew we were Jewish, but I was told as a little boy not to say that we were Jewish. And he told the story that when he was 4 or 5 years old, some relative came back after liberating Dachau and said to him, don't ever say we're Jewish. It's not safe to be Jewish even today. So he had this daughter who was almost 40 years old, who had converted / returned to Judaism, who didn't know about it, that history, until he shared it with her. And she said, I felt that, I knew that, I always knew that was the case. Why did you wait so long to tell me? So I have lots of those kinds of stories. One of the people that or two of the people that you saw briefly in the video, I know very, very well. One of them he was in front of an Aron in a synagogue, and he's had a kippah on, and his name was Bill Carvajal. I don't know if you caught that at the time. Maybe it's going to be anyway, he is from this family. Okay. And he returned to Judaism as a young man. The rest of his family has not. There are Carvajals, because there are a lot of Carvajals in the United States and Mexico, but his particular branch, he's the only one who did convert. So that I share with you as well. Anyway, so that's my story on that. So what are the common practices? People say to me, yeah, they think they were Jewish because somebody had a candlestick, or they lit a candle or this and that. It's interesting to me when I think back on and I have about 15 names here of people that I know their stories well. Not one of them came to me and said, my grandma lit a candle, candlesticks. I don't remember that. That is what people say all the time, but that isn't really how they came to it at all. So to kind of top off my stories of people who I know, I want to talk to you about somebody who is today known as Rabbi Juan Mejia. And Juan is somebody that we had the privilege to get to know when he was still in rabbinical school. We hosted him at our home in El Paso, and he and his family came many times after that. We've actually been in his home. I was born to a middle-class Catholic family in Bogota, Colombia. I was privileged enough to be accepted into an elite Catholic school for boys run by American Benedictine monks. There I learned English and developed a strong sense of vocation and religiosity. When I was 15, while celebrating Christmas with my family, my grandfather revealed to an astonished congregation, meaning this was in his home, not a literal congregation, group of people, my grandfather revealed our family's Jewish origins. He didn't know much, just that in his childhood hacienda, the men met twice a day in a special room and prayed with towels on their heads from tiny little books and spoke a very strange language. Later in life, when he confronted his relatives concerning the strange traditions of his family, they confessed to him openly that they were indeed Jews. This revelation startled me, and I began my journey that would end in Jerusalem many years later. While studying philosophy at the National University of Colombia, I became fascinated with medieval thought and started to read the works of Maimonides and to find out more about the Jews of Spain and what became of them. The knowledge that the blood in my veins had somehow participated in that splendorous golden age of Sepharad made me incredibly proud, although at that time I did not consider the option of conversion. Only many years later, while taking a backpacking trip across Europe, did I find my way back to the land of my ancestors. I decided to take a detour and visit Israel. There at the Western Wall, I realized the incredible injustice that had been perpetrated against my family and my heritage. I decided to correct the historical mistake and cheat the Inquisition by converting to Judaism. Excuse me. The trip back was not easy. Colombia, unlike America, and I want to take exception because I'm saying like America as well, but he says Colombia, unlike America, does not have a thriving and learned community that is willing, albeit sometimes reluctant, to receive converts. One cannot go into a bookstore and buy a Siddur as easily as one can do in America. And most important of all, the doors of all of the synagogues, Orthodox and liberal alike, are closed to those who come from the outside. Only through the indefatigable, however you pronounce it, efforts of a wonderful member of the conservative congregation in Bogota, a Ger Tzedek himself, meaning Jew by choice, I was able, after a couple of years, to see the inside of a synagogue. Meanwhile, I studied on my own and read voraciously. With the help of my ancient Greek teacher, I started to teach myself biblical Hebrew. I had a friend in America buy me a talit, and I started to daven regularly on my own. I started to keep kashrut and got more and more involved in my observance of Shabbat. Fortunately, Hashem was very gracious to me. As soon as I finished my undergraduate studies, I earned a scholarship to pursue my master's degree in Jewish philosophy at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Back in Israel, I studied voraciously, both in and out of the classroom, having been denied access to synagogues back home. I shul hopped and learned in as many yeshivot as I could, while at the same time studying for my degree. After 1 year of intense studies, plus many years of reading on my own, I was finally ready to finish my conversion, which I did under the auspices of the conservative movement. I think I'll leave it at that. He has basically been, his wife is a conservative rabbi. She is in, they are in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, of all places. And he basically is constantly in Latin America. He's translated many texts and many Sidurim into Spanish. So he's somebody who I truly admire. He was one of the, he's a Wexner Fellow. He's gotten all sorts of kudos in terms of his accomplishments. He's part of Kulanu, who's part of L'Kol Lashon. I can't think of the other, Klal, I guess, all of these different organizations. Magnificent guy. Anyway, he tells the story the way he told it to us privately, not the way it's published here, is that he said that it was Christmas and everybody got very festive. That was his term that Juan used. And festive meaning drunk. And they started telling anti-Semitic jokes. And that's when his grandfather stood up and said, enough, you can't do that. And he came clean and told the story. And everybody was just frozen because they had no idea. So that's that story. Common practices, I mentioned that the candlesticks, I'm sure in some people's histories, I just never heard about it directly. Common practices are things like circumcision. The ice cream parlor guy told me that as much as they denied being Jews and they were strong Catholics as such in his family, with all 7 boys had been circumcised. And the circumcision 500 years later is still a thing. Many people I met and I've heard about have been told that don't eat pork because our family has a terrible allergy and you get a very serious reaction. We are allergic to pork. You don't do that. It's also not healthy to have milk and meat together. Also, as tradition is to recall people on the day of their death, which we would refer to as a yahrzeit, which is a very Jewish thing to do, remembering those days. Buying trees, planting trees, having biblical names, eating a version of unleavened bread at Easter time, using, when you cross yourself, say the word Adonai, and many of them not even knowing what it means, but it's something you do when you cross yourself. Just interesting kinds of accommodations and connections. But what I wanted to share with you, if I may, and I'm sorry, I'm reading you something else, and then I'm going to show you a film, and we're going to be, is that in terms of these accommodations, we are coming up on Purim. So I don't know how many of you know this lady, but you kind of might. You know about Saint Esther? Okay. While many Anusim living in Spain and Portugal retain the memory that they were descended from Jews, those who settled in the New World gradually forgot who their ancestors were. All they knew was that they had customs that were different from those of their neighbors. For instance, they didn't eat pork, and the only saint to whom they offered prayers was Saint Esther. How did Judaism's Queen Esther turn into a Catholic saint? Well, according to Professor Janet Liebman Jacobs is her name, who made an ethnographic study of the descendants of the Anusim who live in the American Southwest, sometimes the only way that an oppressed people can survive spiritually is to disguise their own religiously important figures within the garb of dominant religious culture. Since the Spanish settlers brought both Catholicism and the Inquisition with them to the New World, Queen Esther had to go into hiding along with the Anusim. And the holiday of Purim was turned into a festival of Saint Esther. One of the women that Professor Jacobs interviewed, who lives in New Mexico, explained that the festival of Saint Esther was mainly a woman's holiday that was dedicated to mothers teaching daughters the way to run a home according to their unique customs. It was also a day where an elaborate meal was prepared, which was probably a distant memory of the special Purim meal that was eaten in Spain. As to why Queen Esther was chosen as the symbol of Purim and not her uncle Mordecai, who was the leader of the Jewish people at that time, the answer is simple. Esther had to keep her Jewish identity a secret in the royal palace. You know the rest of the story. Identifying with a secret identity was the reason that Esther became elevated to saint among the B'nai Anusim. Anything anybody would like to share? Wendy? No? Okay. I'm going to touch on something and then we're going to end with a clip from the film that I hope you enjoy. I certainly enjoyed it. Everything that I told you is on the positive side of what I don't know that I conveyed well was the incredible passion and sincerity and also bravery of these folks, because they are not only, sometimes they're totally supported by their families or it's a non-issue, but often they come up with a ton of resistance in terms of not letting other people know it's something to be ashamed of, or it's dangerous, or all sorts of reasons for not claiming any kinds of Jewish roots or making any kinds of Jewish practices their own. That's within the family, and there's that kind of bravery. But there's also a lot of challenges in terms of the Jewish community that I've experienced and heard from them firsthand and see all the time. We talk a lot about racism today. We have to put this particular group of people in that conversation, please. There is a lot of bias. The reality is, and the gentleman at the beginning of the clip that I showed you did mention that mainstream Judaism is not welcoming. A lot of these folks look different than the typical Ashkenazi prototype that we think of as being Jewish looking. The truth is that that particular stereotype is our stereotype, and as you know, if you've been in Israel or many other places, is not very accurate at all. But there is an arrogance about they're not really Jewish. They don't look like us. They're not welcome. They're not included. Sometimes they really don't look like. And why? Well, obviously, when you live in different places, there is a lot of cohabitation, intermingling, and all of those kinds of things. But an interesting thing is just a little side fact is that when people were fleeing from the Inquisition and inquisitors and the church, they looked for other people who were fleeing from the inquisitors and the church. And in many cases, in Central and North America, it were the indigenous peoples. It was the indigenous peoples, so that they lived together and they mixed together and they intermarried and such, and so that you're going to have mixed races in that way because they had the common enemy and they had the common safety of being together. Just a little fact for you to think about. But not being really Jewish is or not being accepted is the rejection by the Jewish community is extremely hurtful, and I've had the pain shared with me a lot. I understand that when people from a different history, different experiences come, it might not be racism on our parts. It might just simply be the normal reaction of we don't have much in common. You have to put out a little bit of extra effort because at the end of the day, you have a huge amount in common. They need to be invited. They need to be included. That's my little plea because I've seen the tears and I feel strongly about that. And we talk about, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zevazeh. We're all support each other. Not so much. These people, just like all Jews of color, need to be supported. Okay, so let me share a screen again, please. See how we do. Just want to get the 4:30. I don't know why it's not coming up. Let me see how I can. Forgive me, it's taking a while to react. Don't know what that's about. We'll stop it and try again.
This is where the president wants to build.
This is not what
We're on I-10.
That's not, we don't want this.
Right over here, you can see Juarez. Just look over the border. Now, I don't.
All I know, it builds a. They would bring the bodies over here and pray over them.
Okay, this is where I'd like
that I have, it's not my information. It belongs to other people. It belongs to the families. And that's one of the only reasons I continued with it, because I wanted to assist people in finding their roots.
The first ancestors that I found on this journey were Solomon Halevi and Abraham Halevi in the 1200s. I was able to find Solomon Halevi because he was a very, very, very well-known rabbi. And then also finding out who he was when he converted, that he actually became the bishop to the king and queen of Spain and became the personal tutor of the heir. And so with that type of influence, he was able to protect, in a way, the family.
I personally am fascinated about how they actually lived between the two faiths, because they ended up adopting both. Remember, they're passing this on through generations. So they had to remain true to what they believed. And very often they didn't tell the family till their deathbed, when somebody said, okay, we're going to go and get the priest for grandpa. And everybody would say, no, 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 no priest. And the children had to keep that secret. And they had to tell so many lies, because they would have to go into the church and make sure the neighbors saw them so that they would know that they're following that. Many of the Sephardic women would carry amulets or carry hidden things around their neck just to keep the God, the only God, with them.
This is what our family must have been through. Being thrown in jail, being subjected to the horrible things of the Inquisition. I went online on the Museum of the Inquisition, and I saw the artifacts that they used to make people confess. And I started just crying, and I started doing Kaddish, reading this particular prayer for when people pass. And I started doing Kaddish for everybody, that.
New Mexico has embraced the Spanish citizenship program in a very interesting way. And it's, I think so many people are ready to have a validation or a recognition or some way to address their identity. And the citizenship program gives that opportunity. So these are the letters from the Federation.
Spain had given a 5-year window where you could reclaim your citizenship.
499 here.
It's over now.
And we have some other certifications of the rabbi's signature that are on the bottom. The Jewish Federation in New Mexico has become the predominant institution in the Americas that is processing these Sephardic heritage certificates. My particular role in it is I sign the certification that is notarized, official, stamped document to the Spanish government that confirms that these people do have a Sephardic background.
They still are processing. They're just not taking new applications any longer.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, na'amotzi lechem min haaretz. Spanish citizenship was something that I had thought about at one point in time. But that's not where my exile ends. That's where, in a sense, my exile started. And I don't want to go back to that beginning. I want to go back to the beginning of where Hashem said, this is the land that I will give to you and your children. And I am part of that lineage. And that is where I want to be, not Spain. When I went to Israel, we had a trip into the Negev. And when we went into the Negev, it hit me. It hit me, this is home. And from that point on, even looking at the people that I was around, people walking in the streets, these are my people. This is who I am. So what's the next step? Well, it was very natural to say, let's move to Israel. My goal, my dream when I get there is to have a ranch of my own. And I want to raise cattle. And I want to raise cattle in the Negev.
Now, I live in a town of 750,000 people, of which 5,000 are Jewish approximately. Juarez has 1.5 million people.
It's the border of El Paso
10%,
Juarez.
if just 10% of those people were shown that they had Jewish roots some way or another, and a small percentage of them came back, this community would grow 10 times what it is today.
I'm sorry if the editing is not terribly professional, and I just wanted to give you some feel and some faces. I do not know the rancher in New Mexico. Pretty much all of the others on the screens I know pretty well. Blanco, the one who was in tears talking about saying Kaddish for the people who Inquisition victims, is a dear friend who I'm in touch with a lot regularly. These are all people who have human sides of their stories and are such positive additions to our people. And many of them do feel at home now in the community, but it's been a struggle. Unfortunately, there are many who still feel a lot of rejection and doubt from other folks. I don't mean to leave on a negative. That's not my intention at all. There's tons to talk about, even the foods and all this kind of stuff and little story. But I'm hoping that maybe some of you have some reactions or shares, or maybe your own experience if you know any people who are returnees to Judaism or such. There is actually someone who has moved in the past year here, who is from Brazil, who has been living in New York, who has moved here with her husband to Cleveland, who is a Portuguese speaker, who is Bat Anusim, and has returned to Judaism in the past few years. I've not come across a lot of people here locally.
If anybody has any questions or comments, please unmute yourself and ask.
I have a comment.
Please. Jimena.
Well, I'm a returning Jew.
Okay.
Myself. My mother's last name is Santa Maria.
Okay, that's classic name. That's what I was saying. A religious name. Yeah.
Yes, and I grew up in a Catholic household until I was a teenager, and then somehow Catholicism didn't appeal to me, and then I was nothing. And when I was in medical school, we were arranged in the labs by last name. And I happened to be next to 2 Jewish medical students. And one of them said to me one day, do you know that your last names are classical converses last names? I had no idea what she was talking about, but I started reading about it.
So you had a family secret for real, right?
No, my family, I cannot claim that I knew of any secret.
That's what I'm saying. They kept it secret.
Absolutely, completely. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. And, but I started reading about it and I became very interested in Judaism then. This is in the late 60s. I eventually converted in the 80s. And I'm the only person in my family that has converted. Both my mother's last names are classical converses. Her paternal last name, Santa Maria, her maternal last name Nieto, which means grandson. And on my father's side, his maternal last name is also a converso last name. So, and I did my conversion when I was living in San Francisco. And I have lived a Jewish life ever since. And I did apply through the New Mexico Jewish Federation for my Sephardic citizenship in Spain, which is in process.
In process. I know many folks it's in process. Yeah. They're not taking new applications, I was told a few months ago.
No, but it takes many years. It's been over 2 years.
Thank you so
So
much for
there's
sharing that.
more than one person in Cleveland that is.
Okay, I've only been here 5 years, but I'm honored to meet you.
Forced converses. Yeah.
Any questions? Anything else to share? We talk about, I neglected to mention, just as a side thing, that when these families were Judaizing, in other words, crypto, hiding under the radar and nominally very visible as good Catholics, they frequently had their first son become a priest. That was a very common thing in a new Christian family, that at least one son was a priest. And he would become referred to as the Jewish priest in the family. In other words, he was the one who was acceptable to adding the prayers for the dead that were traditional Jewish prayers, or for circumcising a baby, or all of these kinds of things. It's a very, very weird thing, but it was kind of known that let's get a Jewish priest. We need a Jewish priest for this funeral or whatever. I thought it was interesting. Sorry.
Any other comments, Etty?
I met in Cleveland a person who came from Brazil, and he works at the case. He is a professor at the I think of jurisprudence, and he told me that he is one of the 8 children or so, and he learned when he was an adult that the family was harboring a secret. And he started studying Torah on his own, and then he with a teacher, and so he read the Torah several times with the teacher, whatever. But he said he was not accepted by the conventional Jewish community
That's been my experience. Yeah.
because he doesn't have, and this is a very sad story, they feel rejected, and I really felt for him. And Jimena, thank you so much for sharing your story. And Cheryl, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for being here and participating. Very stimulating conversation.